I was just mistakenly added to a group chat titled Bloodline Only. Inside were over 1,000 messages spanning 7 years, all tearing me apart. They never used my name. Only the charity case. Worse, they had actual betting pools on my downfall. I typed one reply. Thanks for the receipts. Then drove to the party my grandmother forced us to attend. She told us to stay late because tonight, she is reading her will out loud. My name is Nora Jenkins, and up until 11:48 on a Tuesday night, I was living under the comfortable delusion that I had a family. I was 34 years old, exhausted from a 12-hour shift at the clinic, and standing in my kitchen eating cold pasta straight from the container when my phone buzzed against the countertop. It was a single vibration, the kind that usually signals a spam email or a weather alert. I almost ignored it. If I had ignored it, I might have slept through the night. I might have woken up the next morning still believing that the distance between me and my mother was just a matter of geography, not contempt, but I did not ignore it. I wiped my hands on a paper towel and slid the screen open. The notification sat there, innocent and horrifying. You have been added to a group. Bloodline Only, Real Family Matters. My stomach turned over. The name itself was a red flag, exclusionary and pretentious. Exactly the kind of branding my sister Kendall loved. I tapped the icon, assuming it was a mistake. Perhaps Kendall had meant to add a different cousin. Or maybe she was drunk and feeling sentimental. I expected to see a blank screen, a fresh start where they would perform the ritual of pretending to care about my life. I did not find a fresh start. I found an archive. When the chat loaded, my phone lagged for a full 5 seconds. It was struggling to process the sheer volume of data. This was not a new group. This was a vault. The timestamp on the very first message at the top of the history read 7 years ago. 7 years. I stood frozen in the harsh light of my kitchen, my thumb hovering over the glass. There were over 1,000 messages. I scrolled up, the bubbles of text blurring into a stream of gray and blue. I saw photos of family vacations I was never invited to. I saw videos of Christmas dinners where I had been told there was not enough room at the table. But mostly, I saw text, walls and walls of text. I typed my own name into the search bar. Nora, no results found. A cold feeling washed over me. Starting at the base of my neck and spreading to my fingertips, I knew what to search for next. It was a nickname I had heard once, years ago, whispered between my aunt and my mother when they thought I was out of the room. I had buried that memory, convinced myself I was being paranoid. I typed it in now. Charity case. The screen populated instantly. The scroll bar shrank to a tiny sliver. There were hundreds of matches. Sometimes they shortened it to CC. I began to read. I did not read chronologically. I read by trauma. I scrolled to the date 3 years ago when I lost my job at the marketing firm. I remembered that day vividly. I had called my mother, sobbing, terrified that I would lose my apartment. She had sounded so soothing on the phone, telling me that everything happens for a reason. Here is what she wrote in the group chat 5 minutes after we hung up. She is crying again. It is exhausting. I hope she does not ask for a loan because I just booked my cruise. My sister Kendall had replied immediately. Classic CC. She can't hold down a job to save her life. How long until she is begging for groceries? I felt the air leave my lungs. I scrolled further back, to the day my engagement to Mark ended. I had been devastated. I had spent weeks sleeping in my childhood bedroom, thinking my family was sheltering me. I looked at the dates. My Aunt Joyce had written, "Thank God Mark got out. Can you imagine being stuck with that depressing energy for 50 years? And then, a message from my cousin, followed by a series of laughing emojis. I bet $100 she is back living with her mom by Christmas. They were not just venting, they were gambling. I found a pinned message from 2 years ago. It was a literal spreadsheet. They had created a betting pool on my life. The columns were labeled clearly: unemployment, breakups, public embarrassment, financial ruin. There were dollar amounts attached to my misery. My sister had bet $50 that I would have to sell my Honda Civic before the new year. She had won that bet. I saw the Venmo confirmation screenshot she posted in the chat. She had bought a pair of sunglasses with the money she won from betting on my poverty. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. I wanted to throw up. I wanted to scream. But then I saw the message that killed the person I used to be. It was from my mother. It was dated 8 months ago, right after I had a health scare that turned out to be nothing. But for a week, I was terrified I might need surgery. My mother wrote, "Honestly, it is a blessing she is single. Imagine if she had a child? We would have to pay for it. Good thing she is empty, one less mouth to feed." The tears stopped. It was instantaneous. 1 second I was hyperventilating, and the next, everything in the room snapped into sharp, high-definition focus. The sound of the refrigerator humming seemed to get louder. The shaking in my hands ceased. I felt a strange, icy calm settle over my brain. It was the same feeling I got at the hospital when a patient crashed. The emotions shut down, and the protocol took over. I walked over to my laptop and opened it. I created a new folder on my desktop. I did not name it Family. I named it Evidence. I sat down and began to work. I did not just read, I documented. I took screenshots of everything. I captured the timestamps. I captured the names. I made sure the context was clear. I organized the files like medical records. Folder A, the betting pool. Folder B, the insults regarding my employment. Folder C, the conversation where they discussed hiding Grandma's dementia symptoms so they could get power of attorney. I worked for 2 hours. I felt like a coroner performing an autopsy on my own life, dissecting the corpse of my relationship with these people. I found messages where they discussed how to manipulate me into taking care of Grandma Lorraine so they would not have to pay for a nursing home. "Just tell CC that Grandma is asking for her," Kendall had written. "She is so desperate for approval she will do it for free." They were right. I had done it. I had spent every weekend for the last 6 years driving to Crestview, mowing the lawn, sorting the pills, cooking the soup, thinking I was being a good granddaughter. They had been laughing the entire time. They had been banking the money they saved on a caretaker and using it to buy handbags. At 1:30 in the morning, I finished. I backed up the folder to a hard drive and then to a cloud server. I made sure nothing could be deleted. Then, I picked up my phone again. The group chat was still silent. They had no idea I was there. They had added me by mistake, likely a slip of a finger while trying to add a new contact. I stared at the text box. I could have written a novel. I could have unleashed 7 years of rage. I could have asked why, but I knew why. They did it because it made them feel superior. They did it because I was the easy target. I did not want to give them the satisfaction of my anger. Anger implies that I still care. Anger implies that they still have power over me. I typed 4 words. "Thanks for the receipts." I hit send. Then, without hesitating for a fraction of a second, I pressed leave conversation. I set the phone down on the table. For 10 seconds, the room was silent. Then, the screen lit up. Kendall, calling. I watched it ring. Then a text from Mom. "Nora? What was that?" Then another from Kendall. "You misunderstood. It is an inside joke. Don't be crazy." Then Aunt Joyce. "Nora, answer the phone. Stop being dramatic." The phone vibrated across the table, buzzing like an angry hornet. They were swarming. They were not sorry. They were terrified. They knew exactly what I had seen. They knew I had the ledger. I did not answer. I picked up the phone, turned the volume off, and walked over to the calendar hanging on my wall. I looked at the date circled in red ink. 3 days. In exactly 3 days, the entire family would be gathering in Crestview for Grandma Lorraine's 80th birthday. It was the social event of the season for our small town. Everyone would be there, the neighbors, the church deacons, the business partners. I looked at the last text message I had received before the group chat invitation. It was from Grandma Lorraine. "You must stay until the end." I had thought she meant the party. I had thought she just wanted me to help clean up, as usual, but now, looking at the chaos erupting on my phone screen, I realized she might have meant something else entirely. I was not going to hide. I was not going to skip the party, I was going to Crestview, and I was bringing the receipts with me. 6 weeks before the digital avalanche buried me in my kitchen. My grandmother, Lorraine Caldwell, called me directly. This might sound like a mundane detail to anyone with a functional family, but in the hierarchy of the Caldwell-Jenkins clan, communication was a weaponized sport. Information was usually filtered, distorted, or delayed by my mother or Kendall before it ever reached me. I was the last to know about Thanksgiving dinner times, the last to hear about cousins getting married, and the last to find out when family vacations were booked. Usually, I would get a text 3 days before an event saying, "Oh, we assumed you were working, but feel free to come if you can get a shift covered." It was always calculated to make me feel like an afterthought, a piece of furniture they forgot to dust. So when my phone rang at 6 in the morning and the caller ID displayed Grandma Lorraine, my first instinct was panic. I assumed she had fallen. I assumed she was in the hospital and nobody else had picked up their phone. I answered with my heart hammering against my ribs, but her voice was not weak. It was crisp, bright, and startlingly lucid. She told me she was planning her 80th birthday party. She told me the date, the time, and the color scheme, and then she said something that felt heavy with a meaning I could not quite parse at the time. She said she wanted me there, not as a guest, but as a witness. She made me promise to clear my schedule. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the phone, stunned. For the last decade, I had been the invisible infrastructure of her life. I was the one who drove the 40 minutes to her house every Tuesday to sort her medication, because my mother said looking at pill bottles gave her a migraine. I was the one who spent a sweltering July weekend rescreening her back porch because the contractors quoted her $2,000 and I knew I could do it for $300 in materials. I was the one who sat in the uncomfortable plastic chairs of waiting rooms, holding her purse while she got MRIs, hearing the doctors explain the progression of her arthritis. My mother and Kendall? They were the public relations team. They showed up when the hard work was done. They arrived when the turkey was already on the table. Looking pristine in color-coordinated sweaters, Kendall would breeze in, smelling of expensive perfume, and snap a selfie with Grandma. She would post it immediately with a caption that read, "Family First," or "My Angel," racking up hundreds of likes from people who had never seen her change a bandage or scrub a pot. I remember one specific afternoon last winter. Grandma had the flu. I had been there for 3 days, sleeping on the couch, making soup, and changing sheets. I looked like a wreck, hair in a bun, wearing sweatpants stained with bleach. Kendall stopped by for exactly 15 minutes. She brought a bouquet of flowers that were too large for any of Grandma's vases. She sat on the edge of the bed, held Grandma's hand for a photo, and then left because she had a brunch reservation. Later that night, I saw the post. So hard seeing my rock so sick, praying for healing. I was in the background of the photo, blurred out, just a gray shape near the door, a ghost in my own life. I spent 60 hours a week working at Horizon Vale Medical Pavilion. It sounds prestigious, but it is just a long-term care facility where I change bedpans and listen to stories from people whose families have forgotten them. I chose that job on purpose. I chose to care for strangers because, at the end of the day, I could clock out, I could leave, when I cared for my family. There was no time clock, and the shift never ended, but the emptiness I felt at home was suffocating, at least at the pavilion. When a resident held my hand and said thank you, they meant it. Grandma Lorraine was the only reason I did not cut ties years ago. She was the only person who did not look at me and see my mother's practice run. My mother had me young. With a man she divorced 2 years later, then she met my stepfather, had Kendall, and built the perfect suburban life. I was the artifact from the messy past, the charity case they kept around to make themselves feel benevolent, but Grandma never treated me like a mistake. I remember when I was 13 years old. It was the night of the middle school winter formal. My mother had promised to drive me, but at the last minute, something came up with Kendall. A fever, a tantrum. I cannot even remember, and I was told to take the bus. I arrived late. I was wearing a dress from a thrift store that I had tried to alter myself, and the hem was crooked. I stood by the punch bowl, watching the other girls in their shiny store-bought gowns, feeling that crushing, hot shame that only a teenager understands. Then, the double doors of the gym swung open. It was not my mother, it was Grandma Lorraine. She was wearing her Sunday trousers and a tuxedo vest she must have pulled from a costume trunk. She marched right across the basketball court, ignoring the staring teachers and the snickering boys. She walked up to me, bowed dramatically, and asked me to dance. She spun me around that floor until I was laughing so hard I forgot about the crooked hem. She did not let me sit down. She did not let me hide. She told me, loudly enough for the popular girls to hear, that I had more class in my little finger than this entire town had in its bank account. That was who she was. She saw me. During that phone call 6 weeks ago, before we hung up. She said something else. It was a phrase she had used a few times over the years, usually when I was driving her home from the clinic. She said, "I write it all down. Nora, who does what? Who is there?" At the time, I thought she was talking about her symptom diary. The doctors had told her to track her pain levels and her medication intake. I assumed she meant she was keeping track of her pills, her blood pressure, the physical mechanics of her aging body. "I know, Grandma," I had said, cradling the phone against my shoulder as I started my coffee maker. "That is good for the doctor to see." "Not for the doctor," she had said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "For the record, people think old women are invisible. They think we are deaf and blind just because we move slow. But I see who holds the door. I see who checks the watch. I see who is really in the room." I did not think much of it then. I just told her I loved her and that I would be there for the party. I hung up and went to my shift at the pavilion, thinking about how lonely she must be to track the comings and goings of her days in a notebook. Now, standing in the wreckage of my kitchen with the knowledge of the betting pool burning in my mind, that conversation replayed in my head with a terrifying new clarity. She was not tracking her blood pressure. She was not tracking her arthritis. She was tracking us. She had been watching the performance the entire time. She saw the selfies Kendall took. She saw the timestamps on the visits. She saw who was holding the bucket when she was sick, and she saw who was holding the flowers for the camera. And she had invited me directly because she knew. She knew that if she left it to my mother, the invitation would have conveniently gotten lost, or the time would have been wrong, or I would have been told it was a small private dinner, while they threw a gala without me. Grandma Lorraine had bypassed the gatekeepers. She had called the charity case personally. I looked at the date on the calendar again. The party was in 3 days. And for the first time in my life, I realized that the woman I had been protecting all these years might be the only one who had been protecting me. The ledger she mentioned was not a medical journal. It was a judgment, and she was about to deliver the verdict. The morning after I archived the group chat, I decided to run a test. I needed to know if the cruelty I had read in those 1,000 messages was confined to the digital realm, or if it was an active, breathing strategy that they were deploying in real time. I picked up my phone and dialed my mother. My heart was thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs, a physical manifestation of the dread I had carried for 20 years. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice breathless and distracted. I could hear the clinking of china in the background. "Mom, it is Nora," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I just wanted to double-check the details for Grandma's party on Saturday. I did not see a dress code on the invitation." There was a pause, a beat of silence that felt too long. "Oh, honey," she said, her tone dripping with that sugary dismissal she reserved specifically for me. "You know how Grandma is. She does not want anything fussy. Just keep it casual. We are doing a sort of backyard barbecue vibe. Don't overdo it. You know how you get anxious when you feel overdressed." "Casual," I repeated. "Like jeans?" "Sure," she said. "Jeans are fine. Nice jeans. Maybe a blouse. Just be comfortable. I have to go. The florist is here." She hung up. I stared at the phone. Casual. Backyard barbecue. 2 hours later, I drove over to my mother's house. I told myself it was because I needed to drop off Grandma's refill of blood pressure medication, which the pharmacy had autofilled to my account because I was the only one who ever picked it up. But in truth, I was hunting. My mother was not in the kitchen when I walked in. She was out on the patio, directing a team of landscapers who were pruning the hedges. Her phone, a sleek device in a designer case, was sitting on the marble kitchen island, unlocked. I'm not a person who snoops. I have always believed in privacy, but I was not dealing with family anymore. I was dealing with hostile combatants. I walked over to the island and placed the pharmacy bag next to the fruit bowl. As I did, the screen lit up with a notification. It was a text message from Kendall. I leaned in. I did not touch the phone. I just read what was glowing on the glass. Cocktail attire. Photographer booked from 4 to 6. Make sure the lighting is set for the golden hour shots. Tell everyone to stand in position by the fountain. I felt a cold snap in my chest. Cocktail attire. If I showed up in jeans and a blouse, as my mother had just instructed, I would be the only person underdressed. I would walk into a sea of silk dresses and tailored suits, looking like the hired help, and then the photographer would arrive. They would not have to ask me to step out of the photos. I would do it myself. I would hide in the corner, ashamed, feeling that familiar hot flush of humiliation while they posed for their perfect family portraits. It was a trap. It was a calculated, geometric trap designed to erase me from the visual history of this family. I backed away from the phone just as the patio door slid open. My mother breezed in, wiping her hands on a towel. "Oh, Nora," she said, not looking at me. "You brought the pills. Just leave them there. I will take them to her later." "I will," I said. "By the way, are you sure about the dress code? I thought I saw Kendall post something about a dress." My mother froze for a microsecond. Then she turned to the refrigerator, pulling out a bottle of water. "Kendall likes to be dramatic. You know her. She is probably wearing a ball gown, but for the rest of us, casual. Trust me, you do not want to stick out." "Right," I said. "I do not want to stick out." I left the house before I lost my temper. When I got back to my car, I sat in the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I needed to hear it from the source. I needed to give them one last chance to be decent human beings. I called Kendall. "What?" she answered. "No hello. Just an annoyance that I had interrupted her day." "Hey," I said. "I was just talking to Mom. I wanted to check with you about Saturday. Is there a color theme? Or a style?" "Oh," Kendall said. Her voice went up an octave, feigning surprise. "Grandma invited you? I thought you were working this weekend. You are always working." "I took off," I said. "For Grandma." "Right. Well, it is just family, Nora. Nothing special. Mom probably told you. Just come as you are." "Okay," I said. "See you Saturday." "Yup." She hung up. I started the car and began the drive home. I was trying to process the level of coordination it took to maintain this lie. They had to agree on the narrative. They had to ensure I was the only one left in the dark. 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. A notification from Kendall. It was a voice memo. I frowned. Kendall never sent voice memos. She preferred text, usually cryptic and demanding. I tapped play, the sound filling the small cabin of my sedan. There was the sound of rustling fabric, then background noise, a restaurant, maybe, clinking glasses, then Kendall's voice, clear and mocking. She actually called me to ask what to wear. Can you believe it? I told her casual. I want to see her face when she walks in wearing those tragic Gap jeans while we are all in satin. A pause, then another voice, my Aunt Joyce. "You are terrible," Joyce said, but she was laughing. "She's going to ruin the photos anyway. At least this way we can put her in the back. She thinks she is a VIP just because she changes Grandma's diapers," Kendall said. Her voice dripped with venom. "It is pathetic. Honestly, she is such a charity case." Laughter. Pure, unadulterated amusement. Then the recording cut off. I drove for another mile in silence. The road blurred ahead of me. Then, a text message popped up. Oops, ignore that lol. 7 words. 7 words that acted as a slap across the face. She had sent the recording by mistake. She had been recording her conversation, perhaps to send to a friend, and her thumb had slipped. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe she wanted me to hear it. Maybe the cruelty was the point. Oops, ignore that lol. As if she had sent a grocery list to the wrong number. As if she hadn't just confirmed that my entire existence was a punchline to them. I pulled over into the parking lot of a gas station because I could no longer trust my hands to steer the car. I sat there as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, bruised shadows across the asphalt. I started to replay the last 7 years of my life. The Thanksgiving where I was told dinner was at 6, but when I arrived, everyone was already eating dessert. Oh, we got hungry early, they had said. The cousin's wedding where I was seated at a table in the back corner, next to the kitchen doors, with people I did not know. The time I showed up to a casual brunch in a sundress, only to find everyone else in hiking gear because they had planned a trail walk I wasn't told about. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't miscommunication. It was architecture. They had built a maze of social humiliation and placed me in the center of it, watching me bump into walls while they stood on the observation deck and laughed. That night, I did not sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the blades cut through the stagnant air. I asked myself the question that had been lurking in the back of my mind since I was a child. Do they hate me for something I did? Did I offend them? Was I too loud? Too quiet? Too needy? Or do they hate me simply because I exist? If it was something I did, I could fix it. I could apologize. I could change. But if it was my existence that offended them, if my breathing, my living, my being was the insult, then there was no fix. There was no redemption. I realized then that Charity Case wasn't just a nickname about money. It was about worth. They believed I had no inherent value. They believed I was a debt they had inherited, a burden they were forced to carry. By 3 a.m, the tears had dried up, the sadness had evaporated, leaving behind something harder, something like steel. I was not going to stay home. I was not going to hide. I was going to that party, but I was not going to wear jeans. I was not going to stand in the back. And I was not going to smile for their photos. I was going to go, not to beg for a place at their table, but to look them in the eye and let them see that I knew. I would go to see the truth, no matter how ugly it was. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and opened the banking app. I had been saving for a vacation, a small trip to the coast I had promised myself for 2 years. I transferred the money to my checking account. If they wanted cocktail attire, I would give them cocktail attire. I would play their game one last time. But this time, I would know the rules, and I would not be the one leaving in tears. I sat in the dark of my living room, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating the empty coffee cup on the table. The evidence folder was open. I had already processed the shock of the group chat's existence, but now I needed to understand its anatomy. I needed to perform the autopsy. I clicked on the scroll bar and dragged it all the way to the top. Back to the very beginning. 7 years ago. The first message popped onto the screen. Dated shortly after my 27th birthday, it was from Aunt Joyce. Finally, she wrote, a place where we can talk without having to worry about her seeing it over our shoulders. My stomach tightened. They had not created this group to plan a surprise party or coordinate a holiday. They had created it specifically to exclude me. It was a digital clubhouse built on the foundation of my absence. The next message was from my sister, Kendall. She was 22 then, fresh out of college and already perfecting the art of social cruelty. New rule, Kendall wrote. We do not use her real name here. It makes me feel guilty. Let's just call her CC, short for Charity Case. Because let's be honest, that is what she is. Below that message, a cascade of ha-ha reactions and laughing emojis filled the screen. My mother had liked the message, a simple thumbs up that authorized 7 years of dehumanization. I scrolled down, watching the timeline of my life play out through their distorted lens. I found the origin of the betting pool. It was not a joke that happened once. It was a structured economy. I put $50 on her losing that receptionist job by June, my cousin had written. I will take that bet, Kendall replied. She is too desperate to quit, but I bet she calls Mom asking for rent money within 3 months. You are on, my mother wrote. I stared at the words. My mother was betting against my financial independence. I remembered that time. I was struggling. I was eating instant noodles and walking to work to save on gas. I had called my mother once, terrified, because my car needed a new alternator. She had told me she was tight on cash and could not help. Now I knew the truth. She wasn't tight on cash. She just didn't want to lose the bet. The cruelty evolved as I scrolled. It shifted from mocking my failures to exploiting my kindness. About 4 years ago, Grandma Lorraine's health had started to decline. We had a family meeting about her care. I remembered sitting at the dining room table, volunteering to take the lead because everyone else seemed so busy. I remembered feeling proud that I could step up, that I could be useful. I found the chat log from the night before that meeting. We need to figure out what to do about Grandma, Aunt Joyce wrote. Assisted living is $5,000 a month. That is going to eat into the inheritance. Just get CC to do it, Kendall replied. She has no social life anyway. Tell her it is her duty. Tell her Grandma asks for her specifically. She is so desperate for love she will do it for free. That is brilliant, my cousin added. We save $60,000 a year. I will handle it, my mother wrote. I will tell her how proud I am of her for stepping up. That always works. I felt a physical blow to my chest. I had to close my eyes for a moment. The nights I spent sleeping in a chair next to Grandma's bed. The weekends I spent scrubbing her floors. The hours I spent organizing her pills. They were not just ignoring my sacrifice. They had engineered it. They had weaponized my desire to be a good daughter to protect their future payout. I was not a family member to them. I was a free employee. I was a cost-saving measure. I opened my eyes and forced myself to keep reading. I needed to see the bottom. I found the logs from the week my engagement ended. It was the darkest period of my life. Mark had left me 3 months before the wedding. I was shattered. I remembered my mother coming over, hugging me, telling me that men were stupid and that I would find someone better. Here's what she typed while she was hugging me. She is crying again. It is going on for 3 hours. I need a drink. Did she give the ring back? Kendall asked. That thing was at least 2 carats. If she sells it, she might actually pay off her credit card. Mark was smart to run, Aunt Joyce wrote. Can you imagine marrying into that emotional baggage? Pay up, everyone, Kendall wrote. I said they would not make it to the altar. I accept Venmo or Cash App. I saw the transaction confirmations. They were sending each other $20, $50, settling their debts on the corpse of my relationship. They were profiting from my heartbreak. But as I scrolled closer to the present day, the tone of the chat changed. It shifted from mockery to urgency. The messages from 8 months ago were different. They were legal. Grandma is getting worse, Aunt Joyce wrote. She is forgetting things. We need to get her to sign the power of attorney now. If we wait too long, the lawyers will say she is not of sound mind. I already have the papers drafted, Kendall replied. I just need to catch her on a bad day. If we get control, we can sell the big house and move her into a cheaper facility. The market in Crestview is peaking right now. That house is worth $1.5 million. Easy. What about CC? My cousin asked. She is over there all the time. She might notice. Don't worry about her, Kendall wrote. As long as she does not get her name on anything, we are fine. We just need to make sure she is not in the room when we bring the notary. Keep her busy. Send her on an errand. Exactly, my mother added. Just make sure CC does not get involved in the estate. She is not blood related to the Caldwell side anyway. Not really. She does not deserve a cut. I froze. Not blood related? I was her daughter. But in their eyes, I was just a lingering artifact of a divorce, a weed in their pristine garden. Then, I saw the message that made my blood run cold. It was from 3 weeks ago. Kendall wrote, "Something is weird. I went over there yesterday to try and bring up the house sale again, and Grandma was acting strange. She hid a notebook under her blanket when I walked in." "What kind of notebook?" Aunt Joyce asked. "Just an old leather ledger," Kendall replied. "But I managed to peek at it when she went to the bathroom. It is full of writing, dates, times, and I saw Cece's name. A lot." "What does it say?" my mother asked. "I could not read it all," Kendall wrote. "But it looked like a list. She is tracking something. Do you think she knows?" "She is 80 years old and confuses me with the cat half the time," Aunt Joyce wrote. "She does not know anything. She is probably just writing down when Cece brings her groceries." "I don't know," Kendall wrote. "She looked at me differently, like she was studying me." I stopped scrolling. I stared at that last sentence. Like she was studying me. The air in my living room felt suddenly charged with electricity. Grandma Lorraine wasn't just writing a diary. She wasn't just tracking her symptoms. She was building a case. My mind raced back to the phone call. I write it all down. Nora, who does what? Who is there? I had assumed she was talking about being sentimental, but Grandma Lorraine was not a sentimental woman. She was a matriarch. She was a woman who had run a business for 40 years before she retired. She understood accounts. She understood audits. And she had been auditing us. My family thought they were the predators, circling a week-old woman to pick her bones clean. They thought I was the prey, the foolish charity case they could exploit until I was dry. But they were wrong. There was a third player in this game. I looked at the timestamps again. The panic in Kendall's messages had increased over the last 2 weeks. They were pushing harder for the power of attorney because they were scared. They sensed something was wrong, but their arrogance blinded them to the truth. They could not conceive of a world where Nora, the charity case, and old Grandma Lorraine were the ones holding the cards. I closed the laptop. The screen went black, reflecting my own face back at me. I did not look like a victim anymore. I looked like someone who had just been handed the key to the armory. They wanted a show? They wanted a family gathering? I would give them one. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the empty street. I felt a strange sense of peace. The hurt was still there, throbbing like a fresh bruise, but the confusion was gone. I knew exactly who they were. I knew exactly what they wanted. And thanks to Kendall's paranoia, I knew that Grandma Lorraine might be the only other person in the world who saw the truth. I was going to Crestview, and I was going to make sure that whatever was in that leather ledger got read out loud, even if I had to hold the flashlight myself. The next morning, the sun rose over a city that felt entirely different to me. The streets were the same. The traffic noise was the same. But the world had shifted on its axis. I was no longer Nora the victim, the punchline, the charity case. I was Nora the archivist. I spent the hours between 6 and 9 in the morning organizing the digital slaughter of my reputation. I did not just dump the screenshots into a random folder. I organized them with the precision of a forensic accountant. I created a master directory on my hard drive titled Bloodline Only, Archive. Inside, I built subfolders labeled by year and then by category. One folder was titled Financial Abuse and Betting Pools. This contained the spreadsheet of their wagers on my poverty and the Venmo receipts. Another was titled Estate Manipulation. This held the conversations about tricking Grandma into signing the power of attorney and the plans to sell her house behind her back. The third was simply titled The Insults. This was the largest folder. It contained 7 years of them calling me names, mocking my appearance, and laughing at my pain. My finger hovered over the social media icons on my browser. It would have been so easy. I could have uploaded the entire zip file to Facebook, tagged them all, and watched their reputations burn to the ground before breakfast. I could have sent it to their employers. Kendall worked in public relations. This would have ended her career by noon. But I pulled my hand back. If I posted this online, I would look like the unhinged sister. I would be the dramatic one, the crazy one. Exactly as they had painted me for years. They would spin it. They would say I doctored the photos, or that I took things out of context. They would gaslight the entire town into believing I was having a mental breakdown. I needed credibility. I needed a witness who was unimpeachable. I opened my email client and typed in a single address, calvin.sutter@sutteraccounting.com. Mr. Calvin Sutter had been Grandma Lorraine's accountant for 40 years. He was a man of zero imagination and absolute integrity. He wore gray suits, spoke in a monotone, and treated a missing 10-cent receipt like a felony. He was the only person in Grandma's orbit who was not blood, and therefore, the only person who had no incentive to lie. I attached the folder titled Estate Manipulation. I attached the screenshots where they discussed using Grandma's money to pay for Kendall's business trips that were actually vacations. I typed a subject line, Urgent, regarding Lorraine Caldwell's assets. In the body of the email, I wrote only one sentence. Mr. Sutter, if anyone in the future claims I fabricated this information, I need one adult in the room to know the truth. I hit send. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was done. The truth was no longer just on my laptop. It was on a secure server in a downtown office building. 20 minutes later, there was a frantic knocking at my apartment door. I knew who it was before I checked the peephole. My mother would never come to my apartment. She thought my neighborhood was seedy. Aunt Joyce was too lazy to drive. It was Kendall. I opened the door. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a trench coat, looking like a celebrity trying to avoid the paparazzi. As soon as she saw me, she burst into tears. It was a magnificent performance. Her shoulders shook. Her breath hitched, and she reached out as if to hug me. I stepped back. She hugged the empty air. Nora, she sobbed, pulling down her sunglasses to reveal eyes that were red, likely from rubbing them in the hallway rather than actual crying. Nora, please, you have to listen to me. Mom is sick with worry. We have been up all night. I leaned against the doorframe and crossed my arms. I bet you have. It is not what you think, she said, her voice trembling. That group chat, it was just a vent space. You know how stressful our family is. We say things we do not mean to blow off steam. It is therapeutic. It is not real. The money you won betting on my breakup was real, I said. I saw the sunglasses you bought with it. Kendall flinched. She wiped her nose with a tissue she pulled from her pocket. Okay, that was tasteless. I admit it. We were mean. But Nora, you cannot tell Grandma. You cannot. She took a step closer, grabbing my hand. Her palms were clammy. She is 80 years old. Nora, her heart is weak. If she finds out her family has been bickering, it could kill her. Do you want that on your conscience? Do you want to be the reason Grandma has a heart attack on her birthday? It was a classic move. Use my empathy against me. Use my love for Grandma as a shield to protect themselves. For 34 years, it had worked. I looked down at her hand gripping mine. I looked at her manicure, perfect and sharp. Kendall, I said, my voice dropping to a register so low she had to lean in to hear me. Are you worried about her weak heart? Or are you worried about your weak position in the will? The transformation was instantaneous. The tears stopped. The trembling ceased. Her face went from tragic to stony in less than a second. She snatched her hand away as if I were radioactive. You think you are so smart, she hissed, her voice unrecognizable from the weeping girl of 10 seconds ago. You think because you have some screenshots you can destroy us? You are nobody. Nora, you are the help. If you ruin this party, you are cut off. Forever. I was never cut in. Kendall, I said. Get out of my hallway. I shut the door in her face. I locked the deadbolt. I heard her scream something unintelligible on the other side, and then the sound of her heels stomping away down the corridor. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was my mother. Nora, this has gone too far. Kendall is hysterical. Every family talks about each other. You are being incredibly sensitive and selfish. We are willing to apologize for the jokes. but you need to delete those files and promise to behave on Saturday. Do not ruin this for your grandmother." I read the message twice. "You are being sensitive." That was the refrain of my childhood. Every time I cried because they forgot my birthday, I was sensitive. Every time I asked why I wasn't included in the family photo, I was selfish. I did not reply. I did not argue. I muted the conversation. I put on my scrubs. I had a shift at the pavilion starting at noon. I spent the next 8 hours wiping brows, feeding patients who could no longer hold a spoon, and holding the hands of people who actually appreciated my presence. I worked with a clarity I had never felt before. The chaos of my family felt distant, like a storm on the horizon that could no longer touch me. I was building a wall, brick by brick, silence by silence. At 8 o'clock that evening, I sat in the break room, peeling a clementine. My phone sat on the table. It lit up with a single message. It was not from my mother. It was not from Kendall. It was not from Aunt Joyce. It was from Grandma Lorraine. I stared at the screen, my heart skipping a beat. I expected her to say something about the food, or the time, or perhaps a request to pick up ice. The message read, "Come early. Bring your phone fully charged." I stopped breathing for a moment. Bring your phone fully charged. She wasn't asking me to come early to set up chairs. She wasn't asking me to help the caterers. She was giving me an instruction, a strategic instruction. Grandma Lorraine knew. She didn't just suspect. She knew, and she didn't want me to delete the files. She didn't want me to behave. She wanted me to be armed. I looked at the black screen of my phone, seeing my reflection again. I wasn't just bringing a charger. I was bringing the whole power grid. I took a bite of the clementine. It tasted sweet. For the first time in 7 years. I wasn't walking into a family gathering as a victim. I was walking in as the prosecutor, and the judge had just given me permission to proceed. The drive to Crestview usually filled me with a specific kind of dread, a heavy, suffocating sensation that settled in my stomach the moment I passed the city limits. But today, the dread was gone. In its place was a cold, vibrating anticipation. I felt like a spy infiltrating a high-stakes gala, or perhaps an arsonist returning to the scene of a crime before striking the match. I parked my car 3 blocks away. I did not want them to see my Honda Civic parked next to their leased Mercedes and BMWs. I wanted to arrive on foot. I wanted to walk onto the stage they had set without giving them a moment to prepare. Grandma Lorraine's backyard had been transformed. It did not look like a family home anymore. It looked like a spread in a lifestyle magazine. There were white tents peaked like meringue, strings of Edison bulbs waiting for the twilight, and round tables draped in heavy linen. A string quartet was playing something inoffensive near the rose bushes. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted lamb. I stopped at the edge of the patio. I was not wearing jeans. I was not wearing the casual blouse my mother had suggested. I was wearing a midnight blue cocktail dress that skimmed my body in clean, sharp lines. It was minimalist, elegant, and completely appropriate for the event Kendall had secretly planned. I had spent $300 on it, money I should have saved for rent. But looking at the scene before me, I knew it was the best investment I had ever made. Everyone else was in jewel tones and silk. My mother was in emerald green. Kendall was in a shimmering gold gown that screamed for attention. Aunt Joyce was wearing a beaded navy number. If I had listened to them, if I had worn my denim and cotton, I would have looked like a confused tourist who had wandered into a wedding. I took a breath and stepped onto the stone patio. The reaction was a study in physics. It rippled outward from the center of the group. My mother saw me first. She was mid-laugh, holding a glass of champagne, tilting her head back to charm a local councilman. Her eyes landed on me, and the laugh died in her throat. Her mouth remained slightly open, but the sound cut off instantly. Her gaze swept down my dress, then back up to my face, her expression shifting from confusion to genuine alarm. Kendall saw my mother's face and turned around. When she saw me, her hand flew to the strap of her purse. Clutching it so tightly her knuckles turned white. It was a visceral reaction, as if she thought I was going to rob her. And then Aunt Joyce, poor, nervous Aunt Joyce. She turned to see what everyone was staring at. When she saw me standing there, looking not like the charity case, but like a woman who belonged, her hand spasmed. The crystal champagne flute she was holding slipped through her fingers. It hit the flagstones with a sharp, clear shatter that silenced the nearest conversation circle. "Nora," my mother said. Her voice was pitched too high. "You made it." "Of course," I said, stepping over the broken glass without looking down. "Grandma invited me. You look—" She struggled to find a word that wasn't a compliment but wasn't an insult. "Different. I thought I would dress up," I said, smiling a smile that did not reach my eyes. "It is a special occasion, after all." "Right. Kendall?" Kendall did not smile. She looked at me with the cold calculation of a general assessing an enemy tank on the horizon. "We thought you were working," she said. "I took the night off," I replied. Before she could respond, the photographer arrived. He was a professional, carrying 2 cameras on a harness, looking stressed. He began corralling us toward the fountain for the mandatory family portrait. This was the moment I had dreaded for years, the choreography of exclusion. "Okay, everyone gather round," the photographer shouted. "Tallest in the back, family in the center." My family moved with the practiced ease of a dance troupe. My mother flanked Grandma on the right, Kendall flanked her on the left. Aunt Joyce and the cousins filled in the gaps. They created a solid wall of bodies. I stood to the side. "You too, miss," the photographer waved at me. "Jump in." I stepped forward. Immediately, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Kendall. "Nora," she whispered, her voice like sandpaper, "why don't you stand in the back row? On the far left. We need to balance the colors. Your dress is too dark for the center." "Balance the colors," I repeated. "Just go," she hissed. I moved to the back. I stood behind a cousin who was 6 inches taller than me. I knew exactly what the photo would look like. I would be a disembodied forehead and a pair of eyes peeking out from behind a shoulder. I would be there, but I would not be present. "Perfect," the photographer yelled. "Big smiles. Family first." The flash went off. I did not smile. I stared directly into the lens. As the group broke up, a man I did not recognize, a silver-haired gentleman in a tailored suit, approached the fountain. He looked at me, then at Kendall. "I don't believe we have met," he said to me, extending a hand. "I am Robert, an old friend of Lorraine's." I opened my mouth to introduce myself. "Oh, Robert," Kendall interjected, stepping physically between us. Her back was to me, blocking me from his view entirely. "This is just Nora. She is a distant relative. She does not come around often. You know how it is. Every family has strays." She laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound, designed to make her cruelty sound charming. Robert chuckled politely, withdrawing his hand. "Ah, I see." He didn't look at me again. I had been erased. In 2 sentences, she had reduced my 34 years of life, my caregiving, my blood connection, to distant relative and stray. I turned away and walked toward the bar. A waiter was circulating with a tray of crab cakes. He made eye contact with me, paused, and then pivoted smoothly to offer the tray to a group of guests on my left. It wasn't accidental. It was the subtle instinct of service staff who know who the VIPs are and who the hangers-on are. I radiated outsider, and he could smell it. I felt a sudden, sharp grip on my wrist. I looked down. Grandma Lorraine was sitting in her wheelchair near the rose trellis. Her hands, gnarled with arthritis, but surprisingly strong, were clamped onto my arm. "Nora," she said. Her voice was raspy but fierce. "Hi, Grandma," I said, crouching down so I was eye level with her. "Happy birthday." "You look beautiful," she said. She did not look at my dress. She looked at my face. "You look like you are ready for a fight." "I am just here for the cake," I lied. She pulled me closer. Her eyes darted to the center of the lawn where Kendall was holding court. "Don't let them push you out. Not tonight. Tonight, You stay right here, next to me. I am not going anywhere, I promised. Good, she said, because I need you to help me with the technology. She pointed a shaking finger toward the small stage that had been set up at the end of the patio. I looked. There was a podium, a microphone, and behind it, a large projection screen. It was currently black. A laptop sat on a small table nearby, connected by a thick nest of cables. My stomach did a slow flip. A projector. Nobody had mentioned a slideshow. Usually, these parties were just cocktails and gossip. A projector meant a presentation. A presentation meant speeches. What is that for? I asked. Oh, Grandma said, a small, mischievous smile twitching at the corner of her mouth. Just some memories. I thought it was time we looked at the history of this family. She released my wrist and patted my hand. Go get a drink. Nora, you will need it. I stood up, my mind racing. A slideshow. The evidence folder on my computer burned in my memory. But Grandma didn't have my computer. She had her own ledger. I walked toward the buffet table, needing water. As I passed a large oak tree, a hand shot out and grabbed my elbow. It was Kendall again. She had broken away from her admirers. Her face was flushed, her eyes manic. What did she say to you? Kendall demanded. She said happy birthday, I replied, shaking her hand off. Listen to me, Kendall whispered, leaning in close. She smelled of expensive Chardonnay and desperation. I don't know why you are really here, and I don't care, but if you do anything, to embarrass Grandma tonight, I will make sure you never step foot in this house again. Do you understand? We are trying to sell this property next year. We need these people to think this family is stable. I looked at her. I looked at the fear vibrating behind her meticulously applied mascara. She wasn't worried about Grandma. She was worried about the real estate value. Embarrass her? I asked, my voice calm, almost bored. Kendall, look around. You have turned her birthday into a networking event for your career. You have invited people who don't know her middle name. You have treated her caretaker like a party crasher. I took a step closer to her, invading her personal space for the first time in my life. I am not the one who should be worried about embarrassment, I said. Tell me, sister, are you afraid I will embarrass Grandma? Or are you afraid I will embarrass you? Kendall's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at me as if the family dog had suddenly started speaking Latin. I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and walked back toward Grandma's wheelchair, taking my place at her right hand. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the perfect lawn. The lights were flickering on. The stage was set, and for the first time, I wasn't just watching the play. I was one of the actors, and I knew exactly how the final act was going to end. The moment the sun dipped below the horizon, the atmosphere in the garden shifted from a casual gathering to a performance art piece directed by my sister. The string quartet faded into a soft silence, and the spotlight on the makeshift stage grew brighter, cutting through the twilight like an interrogation lamp. Kendall walked up to the microphone. She did not walk like a granddaughter celebrating a matriarch. She walked like a CEO accepting an award. She adjusted the stand, waited for the feedback to settle, and then flashed a smile that was practiced, polished, and completely devoid of warmth. Hi, everyone, she said, her voice dropping to that husky, sentimental register she used when she wanted something. Thank you all for coming to celebrate my favorite person in the world, my rock, my angel, Grandma Lorraine. The applause was polite and rhythmic. My mother dabbed at a dry eye with a cocktail napkin. Aunt Joyce raised her glass. Looking relieved that she hadn't dropped another one, Kendall continued. You know, when I think of Grandma, I think of Sunday mornings in the kitchen. I think of the flour on our aprons. I think of her teaching me the secret to her famous blueberry pie. She taught me that love is the most important ingredient. I stood by the rose bushes, gripping my clutch so hard the leather creaked. Kendall had never baked a pie in her life. The one time she tried to help in the kitchen, she had complained about the heat and left after 5 minutes to check her makeup. I was the one who had spent hours kneading dough with Grandma. I was the one who knew the secret ingredient was a pinch of cardamom, not love. But more than that, Kendall said, her eyes glistening with fake tears. Grandma taught me about presence, about showing up. That is why I have made it my mission to be here, every step of the way, through the good days and the hard ones. She paused for effect. A few guests cooed. Then, she turned her head. The spotlight caught the gold sequins on her dress, turning her into a pillar of blinding light. She looked directly at me, standing in the shadows next to Grandma's wheelchair. And we are so happy that my sister, Nora, could finally join us tonight, Kendall said into the microphone. Her tone was sweet, but the words were a sniper shot. We know how busy you are, Nora. We know that your work comes first, and that it is hard for you to find time for family, but we understand. Everyone has their own life to live. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. It was low, sympathetic laughter. They were laughing with her. And at me. In 3 sentences, she had painted a vivid picture. Kendall, the devoted saint, and Nora, the selfish career woman who couldn't be bothered to visit. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the microphone and scream that I was the one who drove Grandma to every cardiology appointment for 6 years. I wanted to scream that work was the only reason Grandma had clean laundry. But I stayed silent. I remembered the ledger. I remembered the plan. I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to see an elderly woman standing next to me. She was leaning on a cane, wearing a vintage floral dress. I recognized her vaguely as Mrs. Abernathy, one of the ladies from Grandma's bridge club. "Excuse me, dear," Mrs. Abernathy whispered, looking confused. "Did she just say you are never around?" I looked at her. Yes, she did. Mrs. Abernathy frowned, the lines on her forehead deepening. "That is very strange. Aren't you the girl who drives the blue sedan? The one who sits in the waiting room at the clinic on Tuesdays? I see you there every week when I go for my physical therapy." My heart hammered. Truth. It was leaking out, one drop at a time. I looked Mrs. Abernathy in the eye and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. That is me." "And aren't you the one who fixed the trellis last summer?" she asked, her voice getting a little louder. "Lorraine told me her granddaughter was fixing it, I assumed." She looked at Kendall on stage, who was now blowing kisses to the crowd. "I assumed it was the other one, the loud one." "No," I said softly. "That was me." Mrs. Abernathy narrowed her eyes. She looked from me to Kendall, and then back to me. The social mask slipped. She was not looking at a charity case anymore. She was looking at a discrepancy. "Well," she said, loud enough for the people at the nearest table to hear, "that is a very different story from the one being told up there." The couple at the table turned around. They looked at me, then at the stage. The whisper started. It was faint at first, just a murmur of confusion. But it was there. Kendall, who had the instincts of a predator, sensed the shift immediately. Her eyes darted to where I was standing. She saw Mrs. Abernathy talking to me. She saw the guests turning their heads. She cut her speech short. "Thank you all. Drink and be merry," she yelled, placing the microphone back on the stand with a sharp thud. She descended the stairs and made a beeline for me. She moved with aggressive speed, her gold dress swishing like armor. "Nora!" she cried out, her voice overly bright. "Come here. The photographer needs a candid shot of the sisters." She did not wait for me to agree. She grabbed my arm and yanked me toward the center of the patio, but she did not stand next to me. She executed a maneuver that was so precise it had to be intentional. She stepped in front of me. She turned her body at a 45-degree angle. Placing her shoulder directly between me and the camera lens, she blocked my body with hers, leaving only the top of my head visible. "Smile," she commanded through gritted teeth. The flash went off. In the photo, she would look radiant, the golden center of attention. I would look like a shadow, a mistake, a photobomber in my own family portrait. "There," she whispered. leaning close to my ear as the flash faded. Try not to bore the guests with your little stories. Nora, nobody cares who drove the car. They care who brought the champagne. She pulled away, smoothing her dress, satisfied that she had neutralized the threat. I stood there, feeling the adrenaline vibrate in my fingertips. I looked down at Grandma Lorraine. She had watched the whole thing. She sat in her wheelchair, her hands folded over a napkin in her lap. Her face was unreadable to anyone who did not know her, but I knew her. She looked up at me. Her eyes were sharp, clear, and terrifyingly intelligent. She gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a nod of comfort. It was a tactical signal. It meant, hold your fire. Not yet. I took a deep breath and stepped back into the shadows. As I did, my gaze drifted across the lawn to the back of the garden, where the shadows were deepest. Standing there, near the catering tent, was a figure that did not fit the party aesthetic. Mr. Calvin Sutter. He was wearing a charcoal suit that looked like it had been ironed with a heavy hand. He was not holding a drink. He was not talking to anyone. He was standing with his feet shoulder-width apart, clutching a leather briefcase with both hands. He looked less like a party guest and more like a process server, or perhaps an executioner. He caught my eye. He did not smile. He did not wave. He simply adjusted his glasses and looked toward the stage. He was ready. The music started up again. A lively jazz number meant to keep the energy high. People began to mingle, reaching for hors d'oeuvres, laughing, forgetting the awkward moment during the speech. Kendall was back in her element, circling the room, accepting compliments on a pie she did not bake. Then, a sound cut through the noise. Clink, clink, clink. It was the sharp, distinctive sound of silverware hitting crystal. The music did not stop immediately. Clink, clink, clink. This time, the sound was forceful, urgent. The string quartet trailed off. The chatter died down. Heads turned. Grandma Lorraine had wheeled herself to the center of the patio, right in front of the stage. She held a silver fork in one hand and her water glass in the other. She lowered the fork slowly. She did not need a microphone. She had the voice of a woman who had raised 3 children and buried a husband. "Don't anyone leave yet," she said. Her voice carried across the silent garden, reaching every corner, freezing every smile. She looked around the room, making eye contact with my mother, then Aunt Joyce, and finally, Kendall. "I have some family business to discuss," she said, "and I want everyone to hear it." The silence that descended upon the garden was absolute. It was not the comfortable silence of a lull in conversation. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a courtroom right before the verdict is read. The string quartet had lowered their bows. The waiters had frozen in place, trays of half-eaten appetizers held against their chests. Grandma Lorraine did not look at the guests. She reached into the deep pocket of her oversized cardigan. Her hand moved with a slow, deliberate weight. When she pulled it out, she was holding a small black leather book. It was worn at the corners. The spine was cracked and peeling, revealing the gray binding underneath. It was not a digital device. It could not be edited, deleted, or photoshopped. It was a physical artifact of truth. My mother, standing 3 feet away, went rigid. I saw her eyes dart to the book, then to Kendall. She recognized it. It was the symptom diary they had laughed about. Grandma opened the book. The pages made a crisp, dry sound that seemed to echo in the quiet air. She smoothed the paper with her thumb. "I have been keeping this ledger for 6 years," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was incredibly clear. "Doctors told me to track my memory. They said I might start forgetting things, so I decided to write everything down. To make sure I knew what was real." She looked up, her gaze locking onto my mother. "September 12th, 2023, Grandma read. She did not stumble. "Scheduled appointment with doctor. Henderson for hip pain. Called daughter Susan for a ride 3 days in advance. Susan said she had a board meeting and could not make it." Grandma paused. She looked down at the page. "Note," she continued, "Susan posted a photo on Facebook at 11 in the morning. Caption, spa day with the girls, Self-care is mandatory. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone coughed nervously. My mother's face turned a shade of pale gray that clashed horribly with her emerald dress. Mom, that was work, my mother stammered, her voice thin and reedy. Networking. It is part of the job. Grandma ignored her. She turned the page. January 4th, 2024, she read. Heavy snowstorm. Heating system failed in the main bedroom. Temperature dropped to 45 degrees inside the house. I remembered that night. The roads were ice. Called granddaughter Kendall, Grandma read. Asked if I could stay in her guest room for one night until the repairman came. Kendall said she was renovating and the room was full of dust. Said it was not safe for me. Grandma looked up at Kendall. Kendall was staring at her shoes. Her jaw clenched tight. Note, Grandma read, her voice turning steel hard. Kendall hosted a dinner party that same night. 12 guests. Photos show the guest room was used as a coat check. It was perfectly clean. The silence in the garden changed texture. It was no longer confused. It was judgmental. The guests were beginning to turn. They were looking at Kendall's gold dress not with admiration, but with calculation. They were doing the math between the family first speech and the reality of an 80-year-old woman freezing in her own home. But those are just logistics, Grandma said, flipping a chunk of pages. Let us talk about emergencies. She stopped at a page near the middle of the book. She pressed her hand flat against it, as if steadying herself. November 3rd, 2025, she read. The night I fell down the stairs. The air left the patio. This was the incident that had terrified us all, or so I thought. I called Susan at 10:30 at night, Grandma said. I told her I was on the floor. I told her I could not move my leg. Susan said she was 2 hours away at a conference and would call a neighbor. She never called the neighbor. My mother stepped forward, her hands shaking. Mom, my phone died. I told you that. The battery died right after we hung up. Grandma looked at her. It was a look of profound disappointment. Nora arrived in 18 minutes. Grandma read from the page. She drove on the shoulder of the highway to get here. She did not wait for an ambulance. She lifted me into her car herself. She sat in the emergency room chair for 14 hours. She held the vomit basin. She signed the discharge papers. Grandma closed the book slightly, keeping her finger on the page. And where were you, Susan? Grandma asked softly. When Nora called you from the hospital at 3 a.m, you did not answer. But I saw your credit card statement later. You were not at a conference. You were at the casino. My mother opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked around the party, looking for an ally, but nobody would meet her eyes. The guests were staring at her with open disgust. Grandma turned one last page. But the physical pain is manageable, she said. It is the cruelty that is hard to document, but I managed. She looked directly at me for a split second, her eyes softening, before turning back to the crowd. 6 months ago, Nora's engagement ended. She was heartbroken. I called her every day. I brought her soup. She pointed a finger at Kendall. Kendall sent a text message to me. She wrote, "Don't worry about Nora. She is just being dramatic to get attention. She will be over it in a week." Kendall's head snapped up. That was a private text. You have no right to read private messages. Private? Grandma repeated. The word cracked like a whip. She stood up. It was a struggle. Her knees were weak, and she had to grip the armrests of her wheelchair. But she pushed herself up until she was standing on her own 2 feet. She looked taller than anyone else in the garden. You want to talk about privacy? Grandma asked, her voice rising. Is it private when you have a group chat with 4 family members where you place bets on when Nora will lose her job? Is it private when you call her names behind her back? She took a breath, and then she dropped the bomb. Is it private, Grandma said, enunciating every syllable, when you call your own sister, the woman who cleans my house and pays for my groceries, a charity case? The words hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Charity case. The reaction was visceral. A woman at the front table gasped audibly. Mrs. Abernathy covered her mouth with her hand. The councilman my mother had been flirting with took a distinct step away from her, as if cruelty was contagious. Kendall looked like she had been slapped. Her face went blotchy and red. That is just a joke. It is just a nickname. You don't understand our humor. I understand respect, Grandma said. And I understand love, and I know the difference between family and parasites. She closed the leather book with a final, definitive thud. She placed it back into her pocket. I have recorded every missed appointment, Grandma said to the silent crowd. I have recorded every lie. I have recorded every dollar Nora spent on my care while you two claimed you were supporting me. It is all here, in ink. She looked exhausted, but she remained standing. She looked over the heads of the stunned guests, toward the back of the garden. But my handwriting is getting shaky, she said. And I am just an old woman. You might think I'm confused. You might think I wrote down the wrong dates. She gestured toward the shadows where the catering tent met the rose bushes. So I invited someone else, someone who keeps much better records than I do. Someone who has been watching the money while I was watching the clock. She looked at my mother, whose eyes were wide with terror. Susan, you said you handled my finances to help me. You said you were protecting the estate. Grandma shook her head. I think it is time we heard from the accountant. She waved her hand, and Mr. Calvin Sutter stepped out of the shadows. He walked into the light of the patio lamps, clutching his briefcase. He did not look like a party guest. He looked like the end of the world. Mr. Calvin Sutter did not walk to the center of the patio so much as he occupied it. He moved with the unhurried, terrifying patience of a man who knows that the numbers always balance in the end. He placed his leather briefcase on a cocktail table, moving a discarded champagne flute aside with a distasteful flick of his finger. He did not look at the crowd. He looked at the latch of his case, snapping it open with a sound that cracked through the silence like a judge's gavel. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and pulled out a single, crisp manila folder. My job, Mr. Sutter began, his voice flat and devoid of any theatricality, is to manage the assets of the Caldwell estate. Usually, that involves tax filings and investment portfolios. However, 6 months ago, my duties expanded into surveillance. He looked up then, his gaze landing squarely on Kendall. On July 12th, Miss Kendall, you came to my office to discuss the potential liquidation of the lakeside property. You left your phone unlocked on my conference table when you went to the restroom. You received a notification. Kendall's face went white. She took a step back, bumping into a waiter. It was a message from a group chat titled Bloodline Only. Mr. Sutter said, reading from a document in his hand. The preview message read, The old bat is taking forever to kick the bucket. We might have to push the sale before she dies. The crowd gasped. It was a sharp, collective intake of breath. I did not violate your privacy. Mr. Sutter continued calmly. However, as the fiduciary for your grandmother, I have a legal obligation to protect her interests against fraud and elder abuse. I observed the screen, I saw the context, and I made a decision. He turned to Grandma Lorraine. I reported the existence of this group to Mrs. Caldwell the next day, and at her request, I have been monitoring the digital footprint of this family ever since. Mrs. Caldwell has read every message you sent in the last 6 months. She knows about the insults. She knows about the mockery. My mother, Susan, stepped forward. She looked like she was drowning. Her hands were fluttering in front of her chest. Mr. Sutter, please, this is a misunderstanding. It is dark humor. We cope with stress differently. It was just a joke. Mr. Sutter looked at her over the rim of his glasses. A joke, he repeated. He shuffled a paper in his file. Mrs. Jenkins, jokes do not typically require an Excel spreadsheet to track betting odds on your daughter's financial ruin. He pulled out a printed spreadsheet. It was the same one I had seen on my laptop, but seeing it here, printed on high-quality bond paper in the hands of a forensic accountant, made it feel like an indictment. Here is a wager from last Christmas. Mr. Sutter read, Susan bets $100 that Nora will ask for a loan by December 25th. Kendall raises the bet to $200 if Nora cries when she asks. He looked at my mother. You lost that bet. By the way, Nora never asked. My mother shrank back, looking physically smaller in her expensive dress. But the cruelty is moral, Mr. Sutter said, flipping the page. My concern is legal, and this is where the joke ends. He held up a stack of emails. I have here a chain of correspondence between Kendall and Joyce regarding a petition for guardianship. Aunt Joyce let out a small squeak of terror. The subject line is incompetent strategy. Mr. Sutter read, In these emails, you discuss finding a doctor who would be willing to testify that Mrs. Caldwell is suffering from advanced dementia. You discuss, specifically, how to coach her into getting confused during an evaluation. That is a lie. Kendall screamed. Her voice tore through the garden, shrill and desperate. We were worried about her memory. We were trying to help her. You were trying to help yourselves to the real estate portfolio. Mr. Sutter corrected, his voice dropping an octave. Because in the next email, you discuss how quickly you could list this house once you had power of attorney. You estimated you could get $1.8 million for it. He paused, letting the number hang in the air. $1.8 million. That was the price of their loyalty. And finally, Mr. Sutter said, reaching into the briefcase for one last document. The credit card. He held up a monthly statement. It was marked with red ink. 3 years ago, Mrs. Caldwell issued a supplementary credit card to you. Kendall. It was explicitly for emergency medical supplies and pharmacy runs to assist with her care. Kendall was shaking her head violently. I bought her medicine, I did. You did, Mr. Sutter agreed. Occasional aspirin, some vitamins, but according to this audit, 90% of the charges on this card were not made at a pharmacy. He ran his finger down the list. $400 at a boutique in the city, $800 for a wellness retreat in Sedona, $2,000 for flights to Miami. He looked up. Unless Mrs. Caldwell needed urgent medical care at a nightclub in South Beach. This is embezzlement. You have no right, Kendall shrieked. She lunged forward, as if she intended to snatch the papers from his hand. But her husband grabbed her arm and held her back. This is a private family matter. You are an employee. You have no right to expose us like this. He has every right, Grandma Lorraine said. We all turned to her. She was still standing. Though she was leaning heavily on the table now, her eyes were blazing. It is my money, Kendall, Grandma said. I have the right to know if my granddaughter is buying my medicine or buying herself a lifestyle she cannot afford. A hushed conversation broke out at a table near the back. A woman in a red dress leaned over to her husband, whispering loud enough for the wind to carry it. I remember that, the woman said. Kendall told me last month she was coming into a large inheritance soon. She said she was already spending it because it was a sure thing. The puzzle pieces slammed together for everyone in the garden. The sure thing was Grandma's death. They had been spending money they expected to inherit, banking on her demise, and when she didn't die fast enough. They tried to speed up the process by declaring her incompetent. Mr. Sutter turned away from Kendall. He swiveled his body toward me. For the first time all night, his expression softened. It wasn't a smile, but the lines of tension around his mouth relaxed. I also audited Nora Jenkins, he said. My heart stopped. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, but the word audit carries a primal fear. I went through 7 years of financial records. Mr. Sutter said, I looked for every reimbursement request. I looked for every gas receipt. I looked for every hour of time billed. He held up a single, blank sheet of paper. 0, he said. Nora has driven Mrs. Caldwell to 240 medical appointments. She has purchased $3,000 worth of groceries on her own personal debit card. She has paid for home repairs out of her own pocket. He looked at the crowd. She has never asked for reimbursement. She has never asked for a loan. She has never asked for a thank you. He turned to me and nodded. The accounts are clear. Nora, you are the only solvent asset in this family. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for a decade. It wasn't a cheer. It wasn't a laugh. It was just an exhale. The heavy, crushing weight of being the charity case dissolved into the night air. I wasn't the leech. I was the donor. And now, everyone knew it. Grandma Lorraine reached into her pocket one last time. She did not pull out a ledger. She pulled out a thick document, folded into thirds. It was bound in blue legal paper. "Thank you, Calvin," she said to Mr. Sutter. She held the document up. The stage lights caught the heavy cream paper. "I think we have heard enough about the past," Grandma said. "Mr. Sutter has cleared the air. Now, I think it is time we talk about the future." She tapped the document against her palm. "This," she announced, "is my last will and testament. I updated it this morning, and since we are all here, and we are all being so honest, I think I will read it out loud." Grandma Lorraine cleared her throat. The sound was not loud, but in the vacuum of silence that had overtaken the garden, it sounded like a gavel strike. She adjusted her glasses, looked once at the terrified faces of my mother and sister, and began to read. "I, Lorraine Marie Caldwell, being of sound mind and memory, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all prior wills and codicils." She looked up at Kendall. "That means the draft you tried to make me sign 6 months ago is officially garbage," Grandma said. She looked back down at the paper. "Article 1, the real estate." My mother held her breath. Kendall took a step forward, her hands trembling. This was what they had been waiting for. This was the $1.8 million question. "I hereby give, devise, and bequeath my primary residence in Crestview, along with the 4 acres of surrounding land, into the newly created Caldwell Preservation Trust." Grandma paused. "The sole trustee and beneficiary of this trust shall be Nora Jenkins." The scream that left Kendall's throat was animalistic. "What? You cannot do that? That is our inheritance. That is the family home." "Exactly," Grandma said, her voice cutting through Kendall's hysteria like a knife. "It is a home, and Nora is the only one who treated it like a home. You treated it like a liquidation asset. You treated it like a pile of cash waiting to be cashed out." She turned to me. "Nora fixed the roof when it leaked. Nora planted the garden. Nora painted the fence. She has kept this house alive while you two waited for it to rot, so you could sell the land to developers. The house belongs to the person who respects it." Grandma turned the page. "Article 2, the liquid assets." My mother seemed to deflate. Realizing the house was gone, she looked at Grandma with pleading eyes, hoping for a salvageable scrap. "The remainder of my stocks, bonds, and cash savings shall be divided into 3 equal shares." Grandma read. My mother let out a small sob of relief. "Thank you, Mom, thank you." "However," Grandma said, raising a finger, "this bequest is subject to a strict no-contest clause. If any beneficiary seeks to contest the validity of this will, or seeks to remove the trustee, or challenges Nora's ownership of the home in any legal capacity, their share shall be immediately forfeited and donated in its entirety to the local animal shelter." Mr. Sutter, standing in the shadows, gave a small, grim nod. "It was a legal bear trap. If they tried to sue me, they would lose everything. If they wanted their third of the money, they had to accept that I owned the house. They were paralyzed." "And finally," Grandma said, "Article 3, the discretionary fund." She looked at Kendall. There was a fire in Grandma's eyes that I had never seen before. It was the fire of a woman who had been underestimated for too long. "I have set aside a sum of $200,000 to establish a new charitable foundation." Kendall blinked. "A foundation?" "Yes," Grandma said. "You and the family have spent 7 years calling Nora a name. You thought it was funny. You thought it was clever. You called her the charity case." Grandma smiled. but it was a cold, dangerous smile. Well, I think names have power. So, I am officially establishing the Charity Case Scholarship Fund. It will provide tuition assistance for students who have been bullied, excluded, or underestimated by their own families. She looked directly at Kendall. And the sole executive director of the Charity Case Scholarship Fund, with full control over every penny, will be Nora Jenkins. The irony hit the crowd like a physical wave. Grandma had taken their slur, their weapon, and handed it to me as a shield. She had given me the power to define what charity meant. If they wanted to call me that name again, they would have to address me as the executive director. Kendall dissolved. It wasn't a performance this time. She collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands, realizing that not only had she lost the house, but she had also lost the narrative. "Grandma, please," Kendall sobbed, looking up with mascara running down her face. "Can we just talk about this inside? Privately? Please, just give me 5 minutes." "No," Grandma said. "I have spoken to you privately for 7 years. I listened to you whisper in the kitchen. I listened to you lie to my face about where you were. I am done with private. Today we speak in public." My mother stepped forward. She looked shattered. The social mask she had worn for decades had cracked and fallen to the flagstones. "Nora," she said, turning to me. Her voice was trembling. "Nora, please tell her. Tell her we are family. Tell her we can work this out. I am your mother. I made mistakes. But I love you. Please, ask her to change it." The entire garden turned to look at me. The guests, the waiters, Mr. Sutter, Grandma. They were all waiting. I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who had bet $100 that I would fail. I looked at the woman who had told the group chat that it was a blessing I didn't have children. "You can ask for forgiveness," Grandma said to her. "But Nora is the one who decides if you get it." I took a step forward. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I felt light. "I am not here to change anything," I said. My voice was quiet, but in the silence of the garden, it carried to the back fence. "And I am not here to punish you. Grandma has already done what is fair." I looked at Kendall, who was still weeping, and then back to my mother. "You called this group Real Family Matters," I said. "You spent 7 years telling each other that I did not belong. You excluded me from photos. You excluded me from dinners. You excluded me from your lives." I took a deep breath. "I accept your decision." My mother froze. "What?" "You wanted me out," I said. "So I am out. I am not going to fight for a seat at a table where I am not wanted. I am not going to beg you to love me. I am respecting your wish. You are the real family. I am just the charity case." I turned to Grandma. "I am ready to go if you are." "I am ready," Grandma said. I walked over to her wheelchair. I unlocked the brakes. I turned her around. "Nora!" my mother cried out. "Nora, you cannot just leave. What will people think?" I stopped. I turned my head over my shoulder one last time. "I don't care what they think," I said. "And for the first time in my life, I don't care what you think either. Do not contact me. Do not come to the house. If you need to speak to me, call Mr. Sutter." I pushed the wheelchair forward. We walked past the silent tables. We walked past the stunned guests. We walked past the photographer who had tried to edit me out. Nobody said a word. The social judgment was heavy in the air. People were leaning away from my mother and Kendall as if they were contagious. The reputation they had spent years building was gone in 20 minutes. They were not the golden family of Crestview anymore. They were the people who bullied their own blood. We left the party. We left the lights and the music and the lies. Later that night, back at the big house, I made Grandma a cup of tea. She sat on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, looking out at the dark line of the trees. The ledger was sitting on her lap. She opened it to the very last page. She uncapped her pen. Her hand was steady. She wrote one final line. "Today, Nora was seen, Finally, she closed the book and handed it to me. "Put this on the shelf. Nora," she said, "we don't need it anymore." I took the book. I felt the weight of it in my hands. It was heavy with pain, but it was also heavy with love. "I did not lose my family tonight," I said to the darkness. "I lost the illusion of it, and for the first time in 34 years, I can breathe." Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment down below sharing your location and your thoughts on how Grandma handled the situation. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more karma served cold, please subscribe to the Morgan Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story get heard by more people.